Okay, so now I want to talk about the action phase and all the different things you can do during that phase. So you can take up to 2 actions if you wish, and on the reverse of this card, there's a full list of all the different player actions. So the most simple is moving. So for each move action, you can move up to 2 spaces, right? And by the way, you can only do each of these actions once during your turn. So you can't do 2 moves or 2 gather resources. You can only do 1 of each, right? But there is an option if you want to move more than 2 spaces, you can spend money. And the game allows you to spend up to $2 to move 1 extra space per dollar that you spend, right? So I moved from the train station to Arkham Asylum, and if I spent $2, I could move all the way down here, okay? So the other thing that you can do is you can gather resources, which is gaining $1. So I can gain one of those dollars back, for example. Another thing is focusing. So spending an action to focus will gain you any of the focus tokens for a skill. And remember, every character does have a focus limit. In this example for Agnes, it's 2. So I now have a +1 to my strength. Now, I mentioned before that you can spend your focus token to re-roll a die, right, during a test. Now, I have a strength focus token, but it doesn't have to be spent on a strength test. So, for example, in the Black Cave here, doesn't want to focus. Okay. If I'm testing my lore with the book, if I roll really badly and want to re-roll one of those die, even though it's a lore test, I can spend my strength token in order to improve that. Okay, so moving along to the next action you can take, there's warding. So warding is sort of like a magical ability to ward off doom. So that's a lore test, and what it's about is removing these doom tokens from your space, right? So if that is successful, then you can remove, for each success, you can remove 1 token. So in this case, if I was successful, I'd remove that. Now, if there were more than 1 doom, and I rolled high enough successes to remove 2 or more, then I would get a remnant token, and the remnant tokens look like this. So one of the main uses for the remnant tokens are for spellcasters, so which my character is. So part of, like, thematically with the game, because there's a lot of magic, there's monsters and crazy things going on, spooky things, when you cast a spell, you see here there is a little horror icon in the corner. So for me to use this spell that my character naturally starts with, it costs me 1 horror that gets added to my sheet, right? So you can only cast so many spells before you're dead. But if you have a remnant token, you can use the remnant token and spend the remnant token along with casting your spell to cast the spell safely. So next is attacking. So if, let's say, for example, I was up here and my first action was to move, so I went 1, 2. I would engage with this monster just by moving into his space. So the monster would flip to the exhausted side and reveal its stats. So for my second action, I'm engaged with the monster and I could attack it, right? So attacking, you just test your strength and you deal damage to the monster equal to the test result, or the number of successes that were rolled. Okay, so let's back it up a little bit. So let's say I did that move action right? I moved into that monster space and it engaged with me, but let's say I don't want to fight it. I want to evade, right? So evading is the next action. So what I can do is test my observation to evade, and this monster has a modifier of -0, so I just roll 2 dice in order to evade, okay? And if that happens, once I successfully evade, then the monster would go back, but he would go back as exhausted because I successfully evaded him. And then I can continue. So even though evade is an action, if you successfully evade, then you get one more additional action, right? Okay, so one tricky thing about evading, all right, something that could potentially come up, right? So if I landed on that space and engaged with this monster, right, and then want to evade, you get one additional action if you evade all monsters that you're engaged with, which means that you could be engaged with more than one. So for example, if I was also engaged with this guy, I would be trying to evade both of them. And that means I would have to roll 2 successes to escape from both of these monsters. And unfortunately, you roll once and then you take the lowest modifier. So I would be rolling 2 minus 2, but you can't roll 0, so I get to roll 1 die. So the best that I could do in this case is evade one of these monsters, and then the other one would be engaged with me still. And side note, I didn't mention it, so with attacking, if you defeat a monster that has this remnant symbol in the corner, then you get a remnant as a reward. So next there is the research action. So this is all about taking clues which you have on your character card and researching them so that they go on the scenario card so that it progresses you toward learning about the mystery, right? So the research action is an observation test, and for however many successes you get to put that many clues onto the scenario sheet, all right? Trading is basically just if you're with other players in your space, right? As long as you're not engaged with a monster, then you can trade any number of items, right? Any tradable items, so possessions and cards and things like that. And then lastly, certain other things that you'll gain might have actions on them as well. So things that you might pick up from the item, from the display here, or from item cards, or like for example, let's say you have an ally, right? This ally, Zora Larson, as an action, an investigator or ally in your space recovers 1 sanity. So you can have extra, like they call them component actions, and that's just other actions that are non-standard that are part of cards. So that pretty much covers all of the actions that that you can do. There's a note at the bottom that just says if you're engaged with a monster, there's only certain things that you can do. You know, for example, you can't evade unless you're engaged with a monster, right? And then while you're engaged, you can only focus or attack until you become disengaged with the monster. The other thing that can happen that could affect your actions, right, is if you get delayed, they call it, and that usually is signified by laying your character down, and then basically it takes a action to get back up. So I would take 1 action to get back up, and then I get 1 more action so I could move, for example.